We're live. Thank you for joining us. This is Brave New History. I'm here with Dr. David C. Lane. Thank you so much.
Good to be here, Elliot.
So, Dr. Lane is a bit of an expert on Shabad Yoga. Let's see, self-realization. And there's a few, what do we want to call it, borrowers, organizations that have borrowed Shabad Yoga, such as Eckankar.
Right, right.
And yeah, what what's your background in it, and what interests you on it?
Yeah, since I was about 17 years old, I got interested in Shabad Yoga because I read a book by Julian Johnson called The Path of the Masters that was published in 1939. And I thought it was kind of weird, the audible live stream. You listen to some kind of musical sounds, you can get an out of body. I just thought it was funky. And it really didn't resonate with me philosophically because I was more interested in Advaita Vedanta, which is like that non-dualist school, which basically makes the argument that you and I are one with the universe. It's kind of like a Spinozian pantheism.
Yeah.
But it turns out that I met a guru named Charan Singh, who I was very impressed with because he didn't charge money and he seemed like a nice person.
Yeah.
And therefore, the technique got interesting to me. So I started practicing Shabad Yoga. I started to listen to this internal sound. And you'll notice it actually works. This is somewhat controversial now. It may work. Let me back up 2 steps. It may work neurologically. See, I'm not one of these guys that has a problem with it's just the brain. It may just be the brain. That's fine with me. But it does cause your body to get really calm, really numb, and you'll start to feel, if you do it right, like you listen to the more subtle sounds, you'll start to feel like you're leaving your body. Whether you're leaving your body or not, it could be a neurological trick, but it feels really good. And the more subtle the sound is, because they have various gradations, you start to feel more one-pointed. So it's really a meditation technique. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's, interestingly enough, it's transcultural. What I mean by that, you'll find it in Indian yoga systems, in Hinduism. You'll find it in it's kind of a little smaller in Buddhism. You'll find it in Jainism. You definitely find it in Islam with the Sufi mystics. In fact, we just did recently a book on Dara Shikoh, who is the eldest son of Shah Jahan, who created the Taj Mahal. He has a whole thing about Shabad Yoga, and there's a whole bunch of Sufi mystics that talk about it. And then when you look at the earlier Hindu scriptures, like the Nada Bindu Upanishads, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, they all talk about listening to the sound. Well, even Christian mystics talked about it. Richard Rollet talks about hearing the sound. Even Teresa of Avila talks about it, St. John of the Cross. So all these new groups that you've mentioned, Eckankar, MSIA, Qinghai, they all kind of followed that idea. Hey, let's incorporate listening to the inner sound as part of our core technique. In Eckankar, it's called the Ek, and in Qinghai, it's Kuan Yin, and in Radhaswami, it's called Shabad, and in yoga, it's called Nada, or Nada Yoga. The common word is the sound current. Now, since you mentioned it, there we go. I'm not trying to advertise the book. I just want to mention it. What happened is about a year and a half ago, James Lewis is one of the editors for Cambridge University Press. And he asked me, he goes, Dave, you know a lot about this history, so can you write a little book called the Shabad, called the Sound Current Tradition for Cambridge University? Now, here's a little funny twist to it. There's a couple of interesting little stories here. One is that James Lewis wrote one of the books, academic books, on John Roger in MSIA, and he got paid to do it. It's an apologetic. What it means is kind of like a pro-JR book. And he kind of didn't like my position because I'm fairly anti-JR after he robbed my house and tried to kill my wife. Now, having said that, he asked me to write this book. So I write the book. I do this little study. It's not very long, maybe 75, 80 pages. And the problem is I can't get in contact with him, even though he's my editor. It turns out he's working as a professor at the University of Wuhan in China. Imagine the irony, And I guess it's some kind of accident happened. So they had to get a new editor, Rebecca Moore, fantastic editor, by the way, unbelievable. She used to be a professor of religious studies at San Diego State. So finally, the book came out in July. To give you kind of a history of Shabad Yoga from its very beginning days. And I make the argument that it probably arose with the very first near-death experiences. Because if you study near-death experience phenomena, you'll notice that they describe going through a tunnel, fair enough, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel. But as Raymond Moody pointed out in his 1975 book, Life After Life, and Kenneth Ring's book, Life at Death, they started to hear a sound. Now, this is very interesting. The sound that's most common that people hear is a bell sound. Now, if you go back to the earliest ancient yogic scriptures, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Nada Bindu Upanishad, and even the Compass of Truth by Dara Shikoh in Islam, they talk about a bell sound. That's kind of interesting that you have this. So my hypothesis is that it's part and parcel of being a human being. It's part and parcel of human neuroanatomy. Mm-hmm. Now, the mystics in Shabad Yoga, whether it's Radhaswami, Eckankar, John Roger, whatever the group may be, they don't want to reduce Shabad or sound current or audible light stream to the brain. They want to make an argument that it's transrational, transcranial. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't really worry about all that stuff. To me, we know it works. Fair enough? And we know it works. And therefore, to me, I would not be surprised if it was neurological. It is different. I think I'm going to mispronounce this. Is it tinnitus that people talk?
Yeah.
Tinnitus, a lot of people go, oh, it's just tinnitus, but it's not. Let me tell you the difference. Tinnitus is irritating. It's obnoxious. You want to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Shabad is elevating and you get blitzed. It's like, oh man, you want more of it. So regardless of whether it's part and parcel of the brain, there's got to be a distinction between Shabad and tinnitus. And I'm not even going to argue, maybe it is transrational. I just don't like to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, when I was talking to James Bean, he had brought up tinnitus and how that can be a big barrier to meditation because you're hearing this beep, right? And it's not the sound, right? And it kind of gets in the way.
Sound is obnoxious, and you're thinking, what am I doing? Listen to this thing; it's driving me nuts.
Yeah,
James is a wonderful scholar, by the way. In fact, he's the one I had this group called the Radhaswami Studies on Yahoo for like 20 years, and there was all these people I could have like appointed to take over. He was the guy because he's a really good scholar. He's done wonderful original research on the founder of Radhaswami, better than almost anybody's ever done on the planet. And he's really gone through that. Now, having said that, I do think we have to make that distinction of tinnitus and Shabad. And I think if people don't do that, like you just said, Beans points out, you're stuck. You just think, screw it.
Yeah. See, I've had tinnitus before with Wellbutrin, right? Which is one of the side effects. And I didn't mind it that much because, I'm so overwhelmed, like hearing stuff and everybody talking and like you never get silence. But then when you hear silence, it's kind of like you're getting the beep to let you know things are quiet.
Right.
And so I rather liked it because it's kind of like you're at peace, right? It's just kind of telling you like.
Well, let me ask you this. When you heard it, did you notice that it would change gradations? That is, the more you concentrated on the tinnitus, did it start to get more subtle? Like the sounds became more distinct, but also softer and less loud? Did that ever happen?
I didn't really concentrate on it.
That's it. So it's not just interesting. It may well be, given your spiritual status as the new cult leader beyond. I'm just teasing.
Oh yeah.
You're just setting it up. Yeah, I heard the Shabad. I just, no, the point I'm trying to make is that maybe, just maybe, even in Radhaswami Sant-Mat literature, they talk about local sounds that won't take you up. And it may well be that they didn't have the neurological wording or the neurological language to explain tinnitus. And what they really meant was tinnitus, local sounds that take you nowhere. In Shabad Yoga, there are sounds that take you. That is, they get more subtle, they get more blissful the longer you listen to it, given concentration. Now, here's an interesting little thing. It's kind of it's a weird analogy here, but you probably have heard this cliche that the person you're meant to be married to, or your partner, you're going to hear bell sounds. Usually people relate that to like wedding bells.
Mhm.
I have a different idea. My suspicion is that whenever you have concentration, like you said, when things get quiet, or when you're with your lover and you really love this woman or guy and you're looking straight in their eyes, you get a concentrated feeling. You become more aware of what's happening inside your own skull. And oftentimes there's a subtle sound that you're going to hear. So I suspect that because it's neurological or part of our neuroanatomy, I have a feeling that everybody on the planet can potentially hear Shabd. Whether they interpret it as tinnitus or whether they follow it to a non-local sound is what religion or mysticism comes around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting idea, tinnitus, and like what happens if you follow the sound?
That's right.
Because
Non-local stuff.
people don't, right? Like you just follow this path that you follow every day, right? It's worn into the ground and you don't really look at things, right? Like I work for Target at the headquarters, and the other day I wanted to like walk where I've never walked before, right? And there's plenty of stuff, and I got lost in the building.
Yeah.
And
Just get used to your routines. And
yeah. And just during a break, I just kind of walk around, and I'm like, I had no idea all this stuff was here, right? And there's, and so like you'll hear tinnitus, but there's so many things you just don't go there, right? And
yeah. Elliot, what you say makes a lot of sense. Think of our own consciousness. We have the waking state. Then if you drink a little, you get a little different state. If you take Excedrin or too much caffeine from Starbucks or coffee bean, you get a different state. If you take fly agaric mushrooms or you take ayahuasca or LSD 25, different state. Or if you're in love or you're depressed. So there's all these various permutations of consciousness, but most of us don't spend our time doing that. We just, go to work, drink our caffeine. Friday and Saturday nights, most people just drink their booze, smoke their dope, and they live within a parameter. And what you're suggesting, like when you said about walking around Target, well, there's all these other options if you get beyond the routine. And I am a very strong advocate that we should spend a lot more time watching our own consciousness, the source from where it arises. Deep meditation. And meditation, of course, has become extremely popular. But I think you're right. We need to explore consciousness much more than we have ever done before.
Yeah. Or, yeah, on an individual level, because, I never meditate, right? But after talking to James, it sounds interesting, right? There's actually the whole idea, like we didn't really touch on this that much, but like it's all mapped out, right? People can see apparently consistent things when they're up there, right?
Right.
Like there's like you can go here, you can go there, and the Gnostics have it mapped out, and it looks kind of similar, doesn't it?
Well, my wife, Andrea Diem, Dr. Diem, Andrea, joking, and she wrote a book called The Gnostic Mystery, a connection between ancient and modern mysticism. Probably James may have mentioned it, in which she correlates early Gnosticism, hearing inner sounds, with Shabad. And it was actually an MA thesis at UC Santa Barbara. And one of the great Gnostic scholars in the world, who's now dead, Berger Pearson, admitted that this makes a lot of sense, that there must have been some kind of either historical correlation or rather what I think, some neurological connection, which means it would pop up in any culture no matter what. People are going to hear the inner sound no matter where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually just got that book on Amazon.
I could have sent it to you for free.
Oh, there you go. Well, it was only like $5 or something.
Yeah, you just ask me, I'll give you. I'll set you up.
Yeah, there you go. And I remember it's the image is the Apocryphon of John,
right.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
I was trying to teach my son, like he's like, this looks like in some kind of old language, or this isn't English, right?
Right.
And I was like, here, I'll teach you Greek. But he was not at all. He's 6. He was not at all interested. But how it says, you can make out, it says Apocryphon right under the title.
It's cool.
Yeah. But and from when I was talking with James, Gnosticism highly related to vegetarianism, but not so much as with Sant Mat, Like, there's just no way you can't,
What do you
right?
mean? Explain.
Like, Santma, you have to be vegetarian.
Oh yeah.
But
Well,
Gnosticism and, you know,
different schools.
yeah, but I mean, it's recommended by a lot of people, but it's never actually set in stone.
Right. Well, you know, it's interesting you say that, because when I was teaching at Cal State Long Beach, I used to teach this upper division science or religion class. And the guy who hired me, and I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce his name, even though he hired me, his name is James Eisenman. Very famous because he wrote this huge book, 1,000 pages, on James, the brother of Jesus. And it caused kind of a stir. He was one of the first people to get the Dead Sea Scrolls to be released because they were kind of different and private. And what happened to him is that he argues in his book pretty persuasively that Jesus' brother was a strict vegetarian, and that one of the reasons Paul, who never met Jesus and didn't like James, argued that it's not about the food you take, it's not about the Judaic law. He argued against vegetarianism, which is another way of saying,
Yeah.
You got it. It was an argument against James and Jesus, the argument that Jesus may have been a vegetarian. Of course, first of all, we don't know absolutely, but there's suggestive indications that the diet was important. Restrict what you're eating. Now, you mentioned Satmat or Radhaswami. Most of those groups, you're right, especially Radhaswami's, vegetarianism is like a core vow or tenet you have to have. But they're lacto-vegetarians. This is very interesting to me. You can have no meat, no fish, no eggs, but you can have dairy. Now, with the vegan movement, you and I are vegan.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because that's going to have to evolve. Because if you know anything about how they treat dairy cows, they're for 2 years, then they slaughter. It's almost worse. My good vegan friends, 20 years ago told me this. Lane, how can you eat cheese? You're sick, and they're right. But it's hard to, because you have to now adapt to another level. And I wonder if Radhaswami groups will do that as well. Sorry about that. Will do that as well. I'm hoping they will.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's the whole, I don't know, maybe the effects on the body too, like you're sluggish, like after you eat too much cheese. I don't know if that factors into it.
Yeah, they say that. It's one of the arguments against eggs, because they said they have this, it says, what is it, tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic foods, and you want to eat foods that are only kind of light and don't hurt yourself too much. And so they argue against eggs because eggs make you kind of lustful and you want to have sex.
Yeah.
It's a silly thing. But I'm going to say something really strange here, but I'll just do it. I've been intellectually thinking to myself that maybe a free-range, non-fertilized egg may be nature's most benign food. I won't eat it because I don't like eggs, and I've been eating an egg in 50 years. But do you see what I mean? Like, just imagine you got this chicken, right? He's walking around. It's an unfertilized egg, and it's like you're walking around, so it's not like in a cage. And then it produces the egg, which can't do anything because it's unfertilized. So then you ask yourself, wow, this has caused no pain to anybody. But in Radhaswami, they're not going that route because eggs are considered deadly.
Yeah. I was at a sanctuary for animals, and they said that actually the chickens will often eat their own unfertilized eggs.
Really?
Yeah, which
Interesting.
Surprised me. I've never heard of
A
that.
friend of mine who has not a chicken farm, but a couple of chickens, and he says that every time the chicken lays an unfertilized egg, it runs over to them to say, see what I've done? So it's kind of an interesting way. I think what we need to do is, you and I as vegan, we need to be as open-minded, even though I will never eat an egg and I don't eat meat. You're right.
Yeah.
You just got to be able to think, you don't want to be caught like, oh, this is the way it is, because as my friends tell me, when you're eating a carrot or a potato, like in the Jane, I think there's certain vegetables you can't eat.
Yeah.
You're pulling the carrot or the potato or whatever.
Yeah. Well, that's because of the, you could disturb like the bugs.
Oh, very good.
And whatnot, like with like pulling it out. That'll, yeah.
And I had a meat eater in my class one time. He gave a very good argument. He says, Dave, I love animals more than you do. And I said, why? He says, well, I eat them, but because I eat them, there are more animals because they got to keep supplying them. So there's more cows to live because there's more meat eaters because now there's a market for more cows. Mm-hmm. So if you're strictly vegan or vegetarian, that market of cows will go down and there'll be less cows. I didn't buy the argument.
Yeah, it's a little bit silly. Like it's almost like saying, I support the Matrix because it encourages humans to be part of the Matrix.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
And they give out their electricity.
Yeah. Yeah. So Shabd Yoga essentially it's Eckankar a little bit, right? Or it's just the original form. Or
I mean,
how would you describe it more than so you're trying to reach self-actualization?
well, here's the idea. If you go back to the earliest yogic scriptures, like I'm see if I have a couple in here, I probably don't, but if you go to the earliest yogic scriptures, what they do is they practice, let's say, hatha yoga, pranayama, which is breath restraint, asanas, and mudras. Now, their whole argument for them was to get the body in such a condition that it would be easier for you to see inner light and to hear the sound. Now, they say if you follow the light and the sound current to its terminal source, you'll become liberated, Jivan Mukti, or moksha, or nirvana. And the argument is that what the sound current does is cause your brain to get not only still, but to forget everything else but the bliss of that sound. And if so doing, you get elevated to higher and higher levels. And let's go to Eckankar. So Eckankar basically copied Satmat or Radhaswami's notion of inner regions. 5 inner regions. Some people say 8 regions. Eckankar, being smart, says 12 regions or 14. John Roger does the same thing, but he adds more sounds. He kind of tweaks it. And Gary Olson does the same thing with Masterpath. And it's the idea. In fact, it's funny you say this because I'm supposed to give a talk. I'm supposed to go to India in September for a conference that the Dialbog Radhaswami group in Agra is having on the study of consciousness. And I was making this argument that one of the things about Radhaswami that makes it interesting is that there's not just one awakening, like you just get enlightened. There's a continual gradation of awakenings or enlightenments. And one of the arguments in Radhaswami or Satmat is that many people have a mystical experience and think that's it. That's the terminus. They've met it. So in Satmat or Radhaswami, the argument is, no, don't get caught. Keep following the sound current. Go beyond the visions. Go beyond the colors to its source. Now, this is what gets really interesting. The guru who I would probably respect the most in terms of honesty, we mentioned it before, is Baba Fakir Chan. He meditated for 70 years. He did 8 to 12 hours a day of Shabad Yoga. And why I respect him so much, besides being totally honest, is he said he finally got to a stage where he had to let go of the Shabad, where he had to let go of the sound, let go of the light. In fact, I did a little book. Let's see if I can find a book here. I did a little book on him called Hanging on the Gallows is what it was called. In fact, I have it right here. And this is a picture of it. And what he does is he says to get fully enlightened, you have to let go of it all. Light, gurus, God, vision, concept. And that's why he called it hanging on the gallows. Just let go. But he says you don't get to that stage until you follow the Shabbat to its very end. Because then you get to a point where you say, who's hearing the sound? Who's seeing the light? What is that? Then he would say, Fakir told me, he says, that's infinite. And he says, I would just be gone, drop merges into the ocean. At least that's the argument.
Yeah.
Now, if you're to be a neurologist or a materialist scientist, you'd simply say, well, you just read the terminal apex of the brain. The brain's reached its limit.
Yeah. Yeah, that the oceanic metaphor, right?
Yeah. My wife, I did something like that. In fact, I gave a presentation with that title.
Yeah. And did you write a book by that title? Was that by you? Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it's getting at, it sounds very Gnostic, right? You're going up, finding the eons, right? And then you get into the pleroma. And then under this, it's almost like you can get back to the monad.
That's right. You're right track when you mention Gnosticism, because as you know, why is Satmat, not all Satmat, but part of the group like Bayas and Rouhani Satsang, they have these 5 names. And these 5 names are for the 5 inner lords or inner regions that you
Yeah.
have to transcend, like magic words, passwords.
Yeah.
Gnosticism has the same thing.
Yeah.
Because you believe that this God of this universe is not really the God. He's a fake God. He's like the negative power. And so
Yeah.
what you have to do is know that to go to the unknown Father. But there's all these archeons, these demiurges, these different gods, different levels, and so you need to know their names, the argument, so you can transcend them.
Yeah.
The unknown Father. That's really cool. Gnosticism, for my money, this is going to sound really interesting, is probably one of the deepest insights, neurologically speaking, without the neurological language, about how we're deceived about reality. Because the Gnostics make the Maya argument that all of reality betrays its real origination. All we ever see is a sliver of it, just a slight. And that's why Elon Musk can say, well, I think I'm in a simulation. Well, the simulation hypothesis is Gnosticism in technological garb. And the Gnostics didn't have the language. They couldn't explain it that way. But that's what they're really saying. This is a simulation.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So let's see. So that's a recurring theme with the lords, right? You know their name.
Yeah.
That must be symbolically important. Why would that be?
Well, okay, let's play this out. People are not going to like me on this one. I have a feeling that people were not very scientifically astute, and they believed in magic words, magic power, and open sesame. You have the right words and certain things open up. And what they didn't realize, and of course today current mystics more or less do, it really wasn't the word. It was the concentration of the intention of the mind that the words gave, like the mantra. Most mantras, if you really analyze them, are meaningless. Satmat terms, yeah, they stand for something, whether it's in Sanskrit or Punjabi or Hindi or even in Arabic. But the fact of the matter is that most people repeat them. It's nonsense. They're just repeating the words. So what's the point? Well, the point is it concentrates your mind, especially, as Charan Singh once said, and I think he said it wisely. He said, look, anybody can say any word they want. You can say rock, 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 whatever. But the problem is, if you have a guru or a mystic that you admire, that you think is really impressive, and they go, here's this name, there's this word, it empowers you. A best example, it's going to sound like a really weird analogy. Let's just take the word I love you, or the phrase I love you. Well, if a bunch of people say it to you, you don't care. They come up to you and say, I love you. And you're like, I don't care, get the line moving. The person you like, the person you're really attracted to, comes up to you and says, I love you. What does it do? It just gives you just energy. Same thing if the guru gives you these 5 names or Radha Swami or whatever the mantra is. If you can believe it, it juices up. Now, that's the whole secret. This is what Fakir Chand, I think, revealed better than anybody. He said, look, it's your faith, it's your devotion, you're doing all of the work. But the key to it is you need a catalyst. You need someone that's going to energize your system to make you believe to go farther. And that's where I think the guru comes in. That's where bhakti comes in, love and devotion. You've seen people that love Jesus or love Islam or whatever the religion is, they get juiced up by it. So I think that's a component that's not scientific, but very mythological, but it works.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a trope, isn't it? Like you've had the power all along. Like this, it was never about this amulet, right?
That's it. It's a good point.
Yeah. Or I think about Spaceballs with the ring, and they said, no, I got it from a box of Cracker Jacks. It doesn't do anything. The force is in you, right?
Yeah, no. You say this. Let's play that out. Think about the baseball card. I think is it Wagner, whatever. It's like worth $3 million, and it's a bubblegum baseball card, and it's because of its rarity. When somebody sees it, it's like, for instance, I just read a wonderful book about the history of the Gutenberg Bible, and how everybody just wanted to get that that copy of that Bible because it was so rare. And what you just said is correct. It's a trope. It's a way of manipulating the mind to believe and to energize it. I often make a stupid analogy, but it might make some sense. It's going to sound weird when I say it, but I have noticed that whenever I massage my shoulder, it doesn't help. Now, if somebody else massages my shoulder,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
does help. Now, why? Well, there's a couple reasons, but one is our brains predict where our hands are going. So our peripheral nervous system is not energized. If somebody else does it, hopefully, if you're not married, then it becomes predictable. Bad joke. What happens is you get a massage, right? And you feel like, wow. Well, the same thing with the guru. If the guru comes around and says to you, I'm going to give you 5 names, I'm going to give you the meditation technique, you start feeling like you're getting something exterior to yourself. Now, if I told you, Elliot, and I think this is true, you don't need a guru. You don't need a master. Shabad or sound current is in you. And it is. Yeah, it's kind of nice, but it's not the same juice.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's like coffee, making it at home versus going elsewhere. It's better when you get it somewhere else.
You are
food.
Elliot, you're totally right. I have this coffee machine that's pretty good, but I'm like, let's go to Starbucks or go to Pete's Coffee, which is kind of like mud, you know, and then you get it. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point. That's a perfect analogy. I'm going to rip that off. The coffee analogy.
Yeah. Or food, right? Like going out to eat versus making it at home. Like I've made food and I'm like, I don't know. I think I followed the recipe, but this just isn't that good, right?
It doesn't have that feeling like somebody really took some time on it and care. Yeah, it's good.
And with the names, they're secret, right? Even though in Sant Mat, everything should be free, right? The guru should never charge money,
right?
And so it's interesting. Like, there's no real, any of the standard reasons why you would want to keep it secret, right? Don't exist. Like,
I personally find that, I'm going to say this, satsangis and my friends are going to get upset. I find that offensive that it's secret. And I suspect that it's stupid because right now there's got to be 10 million people that know the 5 names, right? It's not a secret. It's like anybody can. And I think, it sounds weird, but I think one of the reasons they did it in ancient times was to give it that mystical, magical allure. Because if you could read it in a book, it doesn't have the same kind of talisman effect. But let's be honest. One of the Radhaswami groups, the ones in Dialbag, Swami Bag, People Mandi, and including Fakir Chand's group, the mantra is Radhaswami. There's no 5 names. They just repeat Radhaswami, Radhaswami, Radhaswami. Beas, which was founded by Jaimal Singh in about 1891, he, because of his Sikh background, and maybe because Shiv Dayal Singh actually gave out 5 names originally, he follows this 5 name thing, and they kept it secret. And when you get initiated in Radhaswami, you're told not to tell anybody. Like if you tell somebody, you're going to take on their karma. It's like some voodoo stuff. Yeah. I have long argued.
Yeah.
I know people, I'm sure, they're pissed at me for this. I think the initiation records and papers and all that should be public. Because I think a lot of people get initiated because they think they're getting some secret knowledge. And it isn't very secret. Even the position to sit to listen to the inner sound, even that they kind of keep quiet. And it's real simple. You just close your eyes, right? And you plug your ears, and you tend to try to listen to the right side of your head or to the center. And it's a bhajan position. It's a certain position in India. You just squat, no big deal. Or you get a tea stick. I don't know if have you ever seen these tea sticks?
I don't think so.
Here, I'll show it to you. One second. Hold on. Showing props. There you go. So let's see if I can give you a good vision of this. This is what they call a tea stick. There's a different, I think it's called a baragan or baragan. I always mispronounce it. But what they do, just to demonstrate to you, I put pads on it because it hurts on the thing. The Self-Realization Fellowship, by the way, also practices the sound current. Because Paramahansa Yogananda, a lot of people don't know this, when he was young, one of his friends was initiate of Radhaswami, probably the Agra group, and he taught him how to listen to the inner sound. And what they do is you put your elbows down like this, okay? Then you take your right hand, your left hand, and you plug your ears like this. It's a very famous yogic position. And as you do it, you can tell why you plug your ears because there's so much noise going around and people yapping happen and stuff. So you can listen.
Yeah.
If you get good at it, you don't need this thing. You just hear the sound. But that's what they do. And they do it as a bodily position where they squat. I can't do it because I'm too old, but you squat and you put your hands on your elbows. Your elbows on your knees. And what's interesting, Elliot, I'll throw this out to you. Why do you think they say listen to the sound on the right side, not the left side?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about that. As you said, it probably virtue is supposed to be on the right side.
Okay,
That's the dominant part.
Well, you're on the right. You're on the right track. It turns out there's several reasons. One is apparently, I read the statistic, could be wrong, but 9/10 of the human population is right-handed. So left-hand people have always been a margin. It's just like in surfing, the goofy footer who stands differently. He's great, don't get me wrong, but he's called goofy foot, right? Not a regular foot. And one of the reasons would be that. The other reason sounds a little weird, but I'll say it. When you go to third world countries that don't have toilet paper, you use your left hand to wipe with water behind your back. I won't demonstrate for people here how do you do it. And that could be another reason. However, I was studying some scientific literature about the sound in right side, left side. And it turns out that the right side is apparently allows you to have more creative understanding. I have to quote it and I don't have it in front of me. But it was an interesting neurological explanation for it, even though they don't know anything about Shabad Yoga. So I'm sure there's a variety of reasons that led to that. But let's be clear. Fakir Chand, Charan Singh, Sawan Singh, Yogini Mataji, this wonderful woman's guru I met named Tripta Devi, they basically said it all comes from the center. That's the key. Not from here to the right or left. It's right from the center.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're given the names one at a time, so you're not giving them all in one go.
You're given all 5 names at the same time. Given all 5 names at initiation. Now it's interesting you say that because some groups, not Radhaswami related or maybe Satmat related, might have 2 names, 3 names. Radhaswami basically in Beas, which is the biggest Radhaswami group, they have 5 names. John Roger, I think I told you this one. You'll like this. John Roger also gave the 5 names.
Yeah.
He did it one at a time, like different initiations. You get this tone, this tone, they get to. And I think I mentioned to you before that he juxtaposed the 3rd name and the 2nd name. That is, he messed it up. What I mean to suggest is that he got it from an initiate, probably of Charan Singh, took over those 5 names and said, oh, this is good. I'll use that as my meditation scale. But he messed up the 3rd and 2nd name because when I met him, he went off tape and said, Dave, are these the 5 names? And I didn't want to tell him that he screwed up the 3rd and 2nd name because I thought, oh, I see what's going on. And he never knew. So he gives out names that, according to Radhaswami, are messed up.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me of Freemasonry. There was this, the passwords, they never change, right?
Right.
And there was an expose written that revealed the passwords. So they just switched them. So now the 2nd degree is the 3rd degree. Switch it around, right? But some people, they didn't want to go along with it, right? So that there was a schism over that, right? And that's how we get if you're familiar, the United Grand Lodge of England, because they eventually merged again.
Oh yeah, I like that. That's cool.
And there's a story. There's a Masonic scholar named Arturo de Hoyos, where he talks about, if you're familiar with the Royal Arch at all in Freemasonry.
No, man.
So the password is, it's only whispered in your ear, right?
Yeah.
And I think, it's just whispered, that they never say it publicly, right? And there was a guy who was the Grand High Priest, who was the head of the organization, and he's been saying it wrong all these years. It eventually came up in conversation, right? And they're like, no, that's not the password, right? So it's kind of...
Well, no, Elliot, you're on the right track. Pronunciation is key. And if you listen to people in Eckankar, they always butcher Indian names. They always mispronounce them. To an Indian, they would say they don't understand how to pronounce these names.
Yeah.
Mitchell was terrible when he would pronounce things because he would screw it up. because he's American, and just like I screw up English and all those sorts of languages.
Yeah.
And what you said is interesting, also related to transcendental meditation. It's founded by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. What they used to do, they had a booklet of different mantras that they would hand out. And everybody who got a mantra, including people like Jerry Seinfeld or Howard Stern, who practices, and the same with Ray Kurzweil, which a lot of people don't know, practice TM. They would get this mantra and they thought it was unique. But it turned out it came from a booklet of all these different kinds of sounds or mantras that you could give out, depending on giving it out. Yeah. So it really comes down to the magic of it.
Yeah.
And I think we live at a time where we need to move from myth and magic into rationality. And I applaud the Dial Ba group in Agra, because even though they're very orthodox Radhaswami group, they're trying to be more scientific about it. So they developed a little chamber where they study the brain waves of deep meditators in Shabad Yoga. And I've made the argument. In fact, my wife's going to give a presentation on this about how the future of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality will allow us to have completely different ways of meditating. Because I don't know if you ever used a thing called Muse. It's a little headband that reads your brain waves.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It has 3 different levels. Like your mind's occupied, you're kind of still, or you're really getting focused. Yeah. And the more focused you get, you'll like this. You hear these chirping bird sounds. So really, it becomes competitive. My wife and I meditate on how many bird sounds you get. I got like 2. The other person, I got 40. And what does that mean though? It means you've got a feedback loop that's telling you how well you concentrate.
Yeah.
With Shabad Yoga meditation, as it's now practiced, who's helping you? Nobody helps you. You're just in your room by yourself, letting your mind wander all over the place. So if artificial intelligence, virtual reality can create a virtual ashram, you could go into a beautiful cave. You don't have to go. You don't have to go to the Himalayan mountains. So I'm convinced that we're going to see a complete transformation of spiritual exercises in the future because of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It kind of brings to mind what's the guy, Morpheus, right, in the dojo with Neo.
Yes. That's a really good analogy you just made, because I've been, as you know, I've been obsessed with VR for 7 years. In fact, I'm teaching that class I was telling you about in VR right now. In fact, we just started last couple of weeks at Mount Sac, first philosophy class, I think, in the United States, where everybody gets a headset, and we're kind of, but along those lines you just mentioned about the dojo, I have been noticing that when I'm in VR, creating new spaces, you can do things that are unimaginable. So you can imagine what it would be. Well, one example, there's a meditation app which does pranayama. And the way you breathe in, it gives you a beam of light. It says, breathe in. The light goes into your mouth, okay? Just virtually. And then it says, hold. And then when you breathe out, the light comes out of your mouth. It's very good for pranayama, because these instructions are better than having a yoga guy next to you. So imagine Shabad. Imagine you're in a beautiful environment, really peaceful and quiet. You have something similar to a Muse headband reading your brain waves. And every time your concentration moves or gets off track, it kind of reminds you, say, hey, no, do this. I think people's meditation would dramatically improve.
Yeah. How does it do that? And how are you seeing yourself? You're just seeing yourself from the outside?
You can do both. And they can give you visualizations. One of the great things about its visualizations is that what it does is it has a little game where certain things show up, and the more focused you are, your mind hits those targets. And the more, so your mind just naturally gets more concentrated. Now, of course, at one stage, you probably want to let that go. It's almost like a foreplay. It's almost like a preparation to be able to listen to the inner sound. Well, let's be clear. What is satsang or Radhaswami groups all meeting together to listen to the Guru talk? It's really just a way of giving you a pep talk, a way of inspiring you. Well, why do you have to go to India to do that when you can do it virtually?
Yeah. And what's the thing? It's just the Oculus, or
it's Oculus Quest 2. It's Oculus Quest 2. It's the latest. Well, it's not the latest. Let me tell you what's going on here. There's been the first one was the Oculus Rift, developed by Palmer Luckey, who was apparently a student, it may have been a student of mine, I don't think so, at Cal State Long Beach back, 12 years ago. Then it came to the thing called the Oculus Rift, and the Oculus, there was an Oculus Go, and now we have the Oculus Quest 2. This next month in October, they're releasing what we call Cambria, or the Oculus Pro Edition, which will be a much higher level headset. Costs about $1,000. Then Apple is coming out next year with their own VR headset because they want to move into augmented reality. So on this VR headset, there's about 5 or 6 different meditation applications you can download. And they change depending on your mood. Like you can pick the mood you're in and it will help you, focus. It's really impressive.
Yeah, that is interesting.
What's going to happen? If you think about this, imagine what's going to happen in 10 years from now when artificial intelligence by DeepMind out of Google develops all incredible algorithms. I was listening to John Carmack, who's probably the most, if you ever get a chance to listen to this guy, he's unbelievable. Probably the smartest guy I've ever met. And I met him at an Oculus Connect conference in San Jose, and he thinks, because he's working on general artificial intelligence, he thinks by 2030, which really surprises me, that we'll have signs of life in AGI. That is, we'll have a real significant sign of subjective awareness in an artificially intelligent algorithm or machine of some sort.
Yeah, that it kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit, huh?
Of course. Well, but yeah, it does. It's deep mind. I don't know if you know this. I've been studying artificial intelligence for a long time, and it's just blown up. It's gone exponential. Mm-hmm. I think the analogy, I may have given you this analogy, but I always like it. I got it from Max Tegmark from MIT, wrote a book called The Mathematical Universe. I think I mentioned this to you before, but imagine you have 300 different squares, and you put an M&M on the first square. There's one M&M. And then on the second square, you double it. So you got 2 M&Ms. Then you double it again. You got 4 M&Ms. Okay? So you just do it till you finally get to the 300 square. Now, I do this to my students. How many M&Ms do you have? And the answer will blow everybody's mind. You have more M&Ms than all the atoms in the universe. That just seems unbelievable. Well, here comes the punchline. Artificial intelligence goes exponential. It goes, 1, 2, 4. And if that's true, and it seems to be true, you can well imagine what we're going to see with AI in the next 10 years, 20 years. That's why Ray Kurzweil, Singularity Near, talks about 2045. Same thing with Dan Brown, who wrote a book called The Origin. And he makes the argument that we're all going to synthesize with AI. And there's no doubt it's true. There's no doubt about it, in my mind. Because it's already happened. It's already happened. We're augmenting.
Yeah. I mean, are we talking about like implants in the brain?
Well, it sounds, when we say implants, you've got an interesting point. Let's look at how it's going to happen. The first thing that happened is that we got computers, big, bulky ass computers in the 40s and 50s and 60s on mainframes. Then what happened with Apple? You got a PC, personal computer. Then they got connected in the late 80s, early 90s off the internet. So they became more powerful. Then what happened is you had mobile devices, which nobody expected would take off when Steve Jobs introduces in 2007 the iPhone, then the iPad and Androids or whatever. So we went mobile. Okay. So everybody, almost anybody has a smartphone. Okay. So we're all connected that way. Well, the problem with this, it's away from me. It's over here. The next stage is going to go here to our glasses. Once it goes to your glasses, this is where Apple Cook is convinced within by 2025, we'll all be wearing glasses for a good reason. Because then you can make every single thing that you look at intelligent. Whether it's your refrigerator, you can find out where it came from, whether it's on the fritz. You can look at other human beings. Nobody likes this, face recognition, to find out this sexual pedophile that just got released from prison, right? Or some new cult leader, John Roger, trying to get recruits. So what does that mean? Okay, so we go to glasses. Well, then what's the next stage? We don't want it here. We want it here. Now, well, that freaks everybody out.
Yeah.
Well, what does Zuckerberg develop? Zuckerberg has developed, I've seen it demonstrated, a wristband that can read your brainwaves, which is really amazing. So that instead of you having to do anything, you just think it and it'll happen. That's the next thing. Well, after that, you mentioned nanotechnology. Nanotechnology will be so small that you wouldn't even call it an implant. You wouldn't even know you got it. That's the next stage. And we're all going to be augmenting we'll all become Google-fied.
Yeah. So there's a wristband that reads your brain. It's not anywhere near your brain.
That's right. It's reading the brain wave, just like the Muse is on my head. So I'm sending out electromagnetic, energy wave patterns, and it interprets it a certain way. They now have this wristband. It's not perfect. Obviously, it's 80-90% accurate. That can interpret what you're thinking at any present moment, given certain quadrants or parameters within your brain. You can imagine that technology is going to get better and better and better.
Yeah, that's wild. And you think it would maybe turn evil?
That's always the downside.
Yeah.
That's always the downside. I mean, it's all. Think about social media. I mean, think about how negative it's been. Think about how mean people are and just nasty and spam and people always trying to send, people from Nigeria tell me they're going to give me $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
They're not. It's like there was a professor at UC Irvine who apparently lost his life savings thinking he was going to get more money from Nigeria. So that's you're absolutely right. The downside is very scary.
Yeah. Are you into Star Trek at all? Star Trek. Yeah. Do you know that one episode where there's a life form? I forget. It's basically AI, and it was generated from the ship, right? And then it goes out into the universe at the end of the episode. You know the one I'm talking about? I think they're in a train. They need to go to they're in the holodeck. And it's represented metaphorically as a train that they're trying to get to.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And they said, well, it totally, it came from the Enterprise. It's familiar with all the stuff that we know and what we live about. So, a Lawnmower Man, back Lord of the Ford Corner says.
First VR movies ever made.
Or is that the name of the episode, or that's the name of a movie?
That's the name of a movie.
Okay, gotcha.
And it goes bad because the guy gets super powerful.
Gotcha.
Well, related to what you said, there's a very famous movie in the 1950s. You ever get a chance to see it? It's fantastic, called Forbidden Planet. And they go to a different planet, and what happens is they found out that this super intelligent population had developed the ability to do amazing things with their mind, just by their mind. But what they had not taken into consideration, and this is somewhat dated, was the Freudian unconscious. All the negative jealousies and envy that can come out. What you're suggesting is that if we get AI, well, we're not really sure it's on agenda. I mean, why is AI going to, it's called the alignment problem. Why is it going to align to what humans want? Maybe AI being so superior, so smart, doesn't want to align to stupid human beings that are miserable and evil people.
Mm-hmm.
Sam Harris, pretty famous neuroscientist, wrote The End of Faith. He's very scared of it. And a lot of people are. In fact, including Elon Musk, he's very scared of AI because of what you just mentioned, the negative consequences.
Yeah. And then, we'll be Terminator, right? Enslaving the world and,
Right. That's the negative. But I maybe I'm just an optimist. I just see it as liberating. And the best example I can give to anybody, because, I get a lot of blowback about VR. People go, oh, VR this. I go, wait a second. I have a friend of mine, I mentioned this to you before, named Kenneth Williams. Kenneth Williams was in a car accident. He was a kind of a gangbanger, interesting, life he was living. And he got T-boned in a car. And he's quadriplegic. Now, let's just play that out. He's quadriplegic. What options does he have? He can't move his hands, can't move his legs, barely move his neck. You put VR in him, the whole world opens up.
Mm-hmm.
Most people's lives, most people's houses, think about it. 8 billion people on the planet, most people don't really have that nice of places to live. And wouldn't it be nice to give them an alternative in which they can imagine and live and produce stuff? I see it as real positive. And I think AI is real positive.
Yeah.
Who wants to go without, let's play this out. Who wants to go back to typewriters? I don't think so. Who wants to go back without Google search? Who wants to go back without GPS devices? So given that, I see a wonderful liberation for humankind, if done right.
Yeah. Yeah. makes you wonder what is real then, right? Like there's that thought experiment where there's this box and it's so pleasurable to be in it. It's like the best thing ever. And you can leave anytime you want, right? But nobody has ever left their box despite being allowed to leave. And it's simulation, it's virtual reality, right? But would you go into that box knowing that nobody's ever left it?
Why? Here's the answer. Why not? Why not? I mean, it sounds really strange, but watch. You already have the VR headset. We've had a VR headsets from birth. It's our brain. This isn't tell us reality. This is a rendering machine that takes about, if I'm not mistaken on this, 0.003% of the total electromagnetic spectrum. So we only get the tiniest amount, and we then interpret such, given our cranial capacities, and we then outsource it like this is the world I live in. But this is, the whole world is here, really, in a sense. So the question then arises, well, if I could get a better VR headset than this brain and live a life of bliss, fulfillment, creativity, and happiness, well, then why not? But let's play this back to the Gnostics. Isn't that what Gnostics are arguing? To get into that box? Isn't that what Satmat's arguing, and Radhaswami, and all religions? Is that this world, as Buddha said better, sucks. Dukkha, suffering. Let's get to a box that doesn't suffer, that doesn't cause pain. So I'm not one of these guys, well, I got to deal with real reality.
Yeah.
Reality sucks.
Yeah, well, it seems on its face that you're kind of you're descending into something fake, right?
But here's the interesting point. There's a guy, I'll quote people, Donald Hoffman, UC Irvine, cognitive scientist. He makes the argument it's already fake in the sense, watch, nature has evolved our brain really for one reason, to survive long enough to pass on genetic code. It does not reveal reality as reality in the Kantian sense, a thing in itself. It only gives you that tiniest sliver to figure out how to, navigate, pass on genetic code. And then once you pass on genetic code, I'm living proof of this. I got 2 kids, you get old enough, nature basically says, get the fudge out of here. Your body gets shit. You're tired all the time. You're like, oh, I got back problems, right? And you look at young people like 20, 25, and you go, damn, why didn't I wake up to when I was 25? Because, I'm old now. Well, that's nature. That's nature lying to us about reality. Why? Because if we saw reality as reality, we wouldn't be able to function. Like there's thousands of millions of mites in my hair right now. I probably got more E. coli bacteria in me than all the stars in the solar system or the Milky Way. All sorts of weird stuff. I don't know about it. And if I did, how would I function? Wouldn't it freak me out? So what you suggest is we're already in the lie. This is why I'm plugging stuff here. This is why I did this little book. You don't read it. It's called Digital Maya. This is the presentation I'm supposed to give in India. Yeah. And what I'm arguing is we're already in Maya. We're already in a fake place. And what the mystics want us to do is wake up to a higher, maybe more inclusive state.
Yeah. Have you seen Westworld at all?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dark.
Yeah, I've only seen like the first few episodes of the 2nd season, right? Yeah. But it does get really dark.
Because the AI realizes their autonomy and they realize they've been enslaved to do nasty things. Like this first season is like, ooh.
Yeah. And the question of what is real, right? Where they say, and it seems almost like non sequitur, like what are you talking about? Real is what cannot be replaced.
It's nice. That reminds me of Philip Dick, the very famous science fiction writer. He says, reality is that which persists after you stop believing it. This is a really pregnant line. You got to think about those things. And that quote's good. But I don't know what that means. Because to be quite frank with you, you and I don't have that. All we know is what we know. We're stuck in our VR headsets. Yeah. All you can do is expand your VR headset. That's all you can do. And the problem is let's talk about cults. The problem is that cults want to tell you we have the final VR headset. We have the final solution to resolve your problem. That's how cults work. I'm making the argument that we are I'm quoting Jorge Borges, very famous Argentina writer who eventually went blind. And he basically said, you're in a dream, but you're going to wake up into another dream, and so on to infinity. Kind of like Inception with no end.
Yeah. So he's saying that about life? Like after death, you wake up into another reality?
Another reality. It's all we will ever know. In fact, if you think about it, you and I can never know death in terms of non-existence. All we can know is a different form of consciousness. Therefore, what we are fearful of, and I make this argument all the time in philosophy, is not death and like non-existence. We love that. It's called deep sleep, right? Mm-hmm. Or listen to my lecture long enough, and you're like, so, thank you. I just got nirvana. But what I'm arguing is that what we're scared of are certain forms of consciousness. That's what we're scared of. We're not scared of non-existence because we've already been non-existent before we were born. We're in non-existence when we're in deep sleep. What we're scared of is a form of consciousness that we don't like. Whether you're in pain, your loved one's dead, you're suffering, you're in pain. That's what we're scared of. That's why to be quite frank with you, I'm scared of death only for that reason. I'm not scared that that'd be great. Non-existence, bring it on. I'm scared that we survive death. That freaks me out. Because then you might be in a state, like, imagine you're in some state, like some weird place, like Missouri, just joking, and you're all by yourself, and you can't get back to your loved ones, which reminds me of that book called Interstellar, the movie. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Yeah.
Really interesting. Remember, he tries to connect, and he's on some other dimension. That sucks. I'd rather be just in deep sleep.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it's really non-existence because you want to exist, right? That's kind of like we're programmed to survive.
Yes.
And if you don't survive, you failed, right?
According to evolutionary's blueprint. Yeah, you're right.
So, I mean,
but it's a trick. It's a trick. You're on the operating system that you and our brains have from millions of years of evolution. Mm-hmm. The trick is it has to convince us that this reality is the most important reality there is. Don't mess it up. Okay? But it's a trick because what it does is it blinds you from the possibility that there might be other realities. That this is the most important reality there is. That's why nobody meditates. That's why people are scared of LSD 25, plyoagaric mushrooms and ayahuasca and do it because it's scary because now it's a different state.
Mm-hmm. So we wouldn't expect, right? Like, how could you keep on existing, right, without a brain, right? Or are you saying that possibility exists?
No, I mean, first of all, I'm an idiot. So always take me with a grain of salt. I don't know, okay? Mm-hmm. But having said that, there are many people. In fact, I was just listening to a debate between, I think his name was last name was Ward, and Daniel Dennett, who's a materialist. He makes the argument that consciousness, number one, is the key. There's a lot of people arguing, it's called panpsychism, that consciousness is the fundamental. Materialism comes out of consciousness, not the other way around. I'm not of that persuasion. However, I don't want to be arrogant enough to think that I'm right, because I don't know. There could be something way beyond the brain. Mm-hmm. I just know this I can say. Once we have this brain, once we're in this body, you said it right. The operating system basically convinces me this is reality, and you better pay attention to it, otherwise you're going to end up dead. Fair enough? Now, the mystics make the argument, I find it very interesting, that if you doubt the waking state sufficiently or seriously enough, you might open up a new state. Now, I can tell you from my own personal experience, I've meditated a lot, and this happened to me once, and it really jarred me. I was in a dream one time, very lucid dream, in which I woke up in the dream, very conscious, like I was awake in the dream, like Inception stuff. And I said, this is fake. This isn't reality. Boom! I go to another state that made the other state look like not real. And now I'm even freaked out. I'm like, oh my God. So, you see all these different states. Well, let's play this out. What convinces us that this is the real state? Like this is it? Well, we already know the answer. It's the idea of certainty. It's the idea that it feels certain. That's why in a dream, sometimes they feel more real than this, right? Because you get this feeling of certainty. I coined a term, got it from Fakir Chand, called the Chandian effect. It's that feeling that for the next 18 hours, this seems like the sum total of reality until I get sleepy. Or if you stay up awake for like 3 or 4 nights, this reality starts to get weird. It gets hallucinogenic. Okay? Or if you take drugs or drink too much or whatever. So if that's the case, then here's the answer. We are neurologically tricked by our neurochemistry to take this to be real. But it's not necessarily the reality. It's just neural trickery. That's what it is. If that's true, then there could be a possibility of something beyond the neural trickery or the neurochemistry. That's what the mystics or certain kind of physicists today sometimes argue, called an information-centric universe. And Donald Hoffman argues this, and he's a really reputable scientist, even though he's a little controversial. He's just convinced you don't see reality, and therefore you're stuck. And why not wake up to a different state? Which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So, like an illusory reality where, I mean, it's hard to understand materialism coming from consciousness.
I know. I have trouble with it too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example of how it works. Okay? Because this is what happens. Let's imagine, Elliot, you and I were in a dream. Okay, and the only reality we ever had was a dream. We're in the dream, but we think it's real. We think it's just like this. Okay. Then all of a sudden, somebody shows up and says to you, you know what? This dream isn't really the reality. Even though it's, the dream brain is what causes it, and this is dream materialism, everything's real and such. However, Elliot, really, you're in another reality, asleep right now in a bed. And in order to access that, you have to wake up. Now, waking up in the dream as reality is like death. So some guy has a hammer, and goes, yeah, I can give you the other reality. It's called hammer time. Boom. And you're going to say no, because you're going to say, no, this is the only thing that's real. It's too scary. I don't want to do that. But we would both know, given this analogy or this metaphor, that this is not the real state. The waking state is what causes the dream state, right? That makes sense. So those people like Ramana Maharshi and Donald Hoffman and some other people who believe in panpsychism make that same analogous argument. They said, look, you got it all wrong. Yes, it looks like you're the body. Yes, it looks like you're the brain. Yes, this looks like the sum total of reality. Guess what? It's an illusion. You're being tricked. And that consciousness that causes this is at a different state which you can access. But guess what? You have to die to this state to get to that state. So somebody may say, well, wait a second, hold on. Can you give me any proof? Can you give me any evidence? So the person says, okay, I'll go to the waking state. Goes to the waking state, tries to bring a Coke or whatever it may be, a Bajan pad, whatever. But every time he brings it into the dream state, you can take a guess, it turns into dream stuff. You can't bring anything from that state into this state without it being transformed by the virtual reality of that state. So what's the evidence? You got to do it yourself. You got to, mystics say, there's a book by Charles Singh, Die to Live. St. Paul, on the road he argued the same thing. You have to die to this life to get to the next life. Now that's religiously sounds really cool and it's good. But, a lot of people are going, I don't know if I buy that stuff. That's why they take mushrooms, psilocybin, ayahuasca. That's why Sam Harris did. Now, Sam Harris is not convinced, I believe. He's not convinced that we're going to live beyond death. But I think he is convinced that there are other states of consciousness that we should access. Whether they're ultimately real or not, that's not really his issue.
Yeah. That reminds me, and it's kind of like other states of being, right? Which are, there's nothing, well, I mean, there's nothing straightforwardly spiritual about it. Where for a long time I didn't understand Werner Erhard. He says we always want to be right about things and have our position, and we can't be wrong. We associate being wrong with dying, and we fight all we can to be right. Where I never understood, like, what does being wrong have to do with dying, right? But it's this state you're in right now, like this collection of ideas that you have and opinions, that's you, or at least that's what you perceive as you, right? And if you come to a different opinion, have a different way of being, something new that you can acknowledge, like you had this collection and that's not the way to be, that's like dying, because you're transformed into something else. What you had before is dead.
That's right. You're right. Yes.
And I finally came to that idea, and it's kind of relevant here. Whereas, like, what's so special about this way of being, right? Especially if it's not working for you, right?
That's right. That's right.
And he goes further to say, well, and really wrong isn't a state that can exist, right? There's no real wrong, right? There's just, from your viewpoint, it's wrong, but there's only like the state of affairs that is actually so, and that's what is, right?
Okay.
So there's no state of affairs that isn't, right? And right is something you don't want to be, because that's holding you back, right?
Okay, well, let's do a little. I like that. Let me play out if I can put this in scientific parlance. All maps, by definition, are less than the territory to which they point. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a map.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that all maps have gaps. Which means that all maps are potentially wrong. Which means that all people that profess such maps are also potentially wrong. So how do you get better? Well, you don't try to prove the map. You try to find out where it's wrong or it's mistaken. Now, that takes a lot of guts, because I got to then confess I don't know that much, and therefore my map that I think is true has a gap in it. And that's how science works. Science works. Karl Popper at a London School of Economics, although there's some tweaks on this, called it falsifiability. That is, can you test this? Can this thing be wrong? And I always tell my students, I go, I love Darwin. I love On Origin of Species. I love Alfred Wallace. Russell Wallace. I love evolution. I think it's wonderful. Now, can it be wrong? Well, yeah, absolutely. A scientific theory has to potentially be wrong. Otherwise, it's not science. It's a dogma. It's inviolate. I have to bow to it, like the Bible. Don't doubt it. So you're right. That's a very good analogy that you just played, because we don't want to be wrong. In fact, I gave this definition of critical thinking. I said, to be a critical thinker is your ability to be wrong and to admit to it. Now, most of us, including myself, are not good critical thinkers, because we want to, I have some kind of truth here. And the more you study science and the more you study the universe, the more you realize how wrong we're going to be. Everything we think presently is not it. It can't be, because it's like squirrels. Yeah, we talked about this before. Or cows mooing at each other. Moo, 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 moo. And they got one cow with a turban, and the other cows are looking at him like that he knows more than another. They're just cows mooing at the moon that don't understand Einstein's relativity and theory of relativity, and don't understand quantum mechanics.
Yeah. And that might be a good application for big AI. They can maybe, because we don't have the brain for it, right, to understand this.
Very good. Keep going on that, Elliot. I like what you're saying.
So they can kind of go out there and be like, well, okay, so there's actually 18 spatial dimensions. And that's why the math doesn't work on like the higher level, right? Because we only interface with 3 of them, right? And they'll just keep on going on about how, like, and pretty soon maybe, they'll turn into guild navigators, right? And like, in Dune, right?
Yes. Right.
And
or Dyson spheres.
Yeah, and I mean, or like the machine in A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we can make such a machine, right? And it'll tell us, well, like the big questions, right? Like, is there a religion that we have has a, or is there a God?
Right.
And then they'll be like, and maybe that's what Hitchhiker's Guide was getting onto. Like, you're not asking the right question,
That's
right?
That's right. And then think about it. When it comes to the answer is 42, you go, what's that got to, it's almost like a paradox, like a Zen koan.
Yeah.
I've been listening to a podcast. Lex Fridman, I think is his name, is interviewing Martin Rees, who was head of the Royal Society in England. And I think he used to be the location professor. I may be wrong on this, at Cambridge, but he said the same thing you just mentioned in a brilliant way you said it, was that AI will open up ways of knowing that we don't have access to, given the limitations of our cranial capacities. We live in 4 dimensions with time. In string theory, talks about 10 or 11, how many dimensions you can argue. We just don't. We can't compute that stuff. We can't even visualize that stuff. So AI, this is what's kind of scary, will become our God. It's already happened. It's already happened. I tell people this all the time. I said, if you're driving in LA and do not know where the directions are, you're going to turn on Google or Waze or whatever it is, and you're going to listen to it. Now, the problem is you're going to take your brain and you're going to become subservient, because you're going to go, oh, Google knows. Google knows all. Bing, no, but Google, yes. And that's scary, because I know LA pretty well, because I was brought up there. And oftentimes I bypass Google because I know it's giving me directions that are not that good. What are we going to do when AI gets too good? Are we going to really question it?
Yeah. Yeah. There's this movie, or it's a documentary about Go. Right? What's the movie called? Something Go, based off of the board game.
Yeah, of course. The most complicated game we know of in Asia.
Yeah, where there's this powerful AI that can beat the grandmasters.
Yeah.
And
it beat Lee Sedol back in 2015. Google developed, I think it's called AlphaGo. And
AlphaGo, that's the name of the documentary.
This is what's so impressive, Elliot. It beats it 4-1. Nobody thought that computational power augmented by AI would beat a master at Go this early on, 2015 or 16. Yeah. Then, this is what's so weird about that notion of exponentials. Remember I said there's more M&Ms than all the atoms in the universe? But maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later, I think it's called AlphaGo 0 Plus or whatever it's called, competes against the earlier, and it beats it 100-0. We're screwed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the movie, they talk about when you're really good, like a human Go master, you'll make a move that makes no sense to anybody, right? And you're fighting over this territory over here, and then you're thinking 1,000 moves in the future. You put the stone where it makes no sense at all, and that's called a God move.
That's right. And that's what happened. That happened in the game. And
Yeah.
Lee Sedol won one of his games, I'm not mistaken, when he realized, I have to think completely outside of the box. I got to do something. Magnus was just interviewed. He's considered, I guess, Carlson is his last name, probably the greatest chess master of all time outside of Garry Kasparov. And he talked about how AI has changed people's games, because they'll give up pawns or they'll sacrifice in ways they would never have done before. Because AI is not worried. AI doesn't feel loss. Right? When I play chess, I'm no good, but I don't like giving up my pieces. But if AI doesn't care, because it sees a larger strategy 10 moves down. We can't do that. Even Magnus confessed that he was good at the short game, not good at the long game. He knew like 4 moves ahead, but not.
Yeah. So you wonder if that might help with humanity about, like climate change being real, right? Which I have to remind our YouTube censors, climate change is real, right? Vaccines are real. Yeah.
Get vaccinated. Don't drink plastic bottles. Recycle.
Very true. But, you'd think like we have this computer that knows everything, that this is the honest to goodness truth. You'd think that climate change denier would be like, well, what does this computer know, right? Just like, what does the science know? But it might help guide humanity. Be like, this is the optimal way to solve it.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and I think you're totally right there, Ellie. I really do believe you're right, because it's going to have information. Like, just imagine that with big mind and how much data it receives, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. It can make predictions and understand things in a much larger concept than you and I could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And we are going to be forced to rely on it. There's just no doubt about it. We're going to have it.
You wonder, just like computers or AI doesn't feel loss, right?
Doesn't feel loss.
Would the computer come back? Well, so we have these climate change deniers that are keeping us back. We're going to have to solve that first, right? Like, we tell them, let's go for the next optimal thing, right? Like, we have to take care of the deviants first, right? If that's what the AI comes back as.
Well, Isaac Asimov, came up with those rules about, I think it was an iRobot, where he tried to explain the rules you'd have to have. That robots can't kill human beings. They have to align to our desires and needs. But I think it was Nick Bostrom in 2003 who wrote that famous book, Are We Living in a Simulation? Article. And he also wrote a book called Superintelligence. And he made the same argument you're making right now. That's the danger. That if AI does not align to human desires and needs and emotions, then it may look at climate change and say, you know what the problem is? It's human beings. So we become part of a paperclip factory, as somebody says, and whatever it may be. That's the alignment problem, and that's what people are worried about. My suspicion is that it's not going to go that route. What it's going to be is it's going to be combinatorial. That is, we're going to synthesize with AI, so that it will follow whatever emotions and needs that we want, hopefully.
Yeah.
But you're right. I like the way you're looking at it, because I do think we're going to have solutions that we never thought of before about climate change and about how we should live our life. An example would be, and this is going to sound like a stupid example, but I think about it all the time. I'm like a first adopter to all things technological, because I just like Nerd Patrol. Not that I'm nerdy, but I like that stuff. And I got the first Apple TV. It was this kind of thick device years ago. And I remember it took us 6 to 7, sometimes 8 hours to download a movie. We'd download it for the next day. Now today, nobody would do that. Because now we're watching TV, it's streaming on Netflix or Hulu. What happened? Well, very sophisticated programs, sometimes by AI, developed compression rates. They could realize what they could eliminate so that our eyes and ears would get enough information. And you can imagine that when we now have the ability with AI, it's called meta learning, which is a new thing, where it's learning how to learn. So that instead of just being narrow AI, it can be AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And therefore, it's now developing algorithms itself without being human programmers developing it. And it can develop the best algorithms to solve a particular problem. I think that's kind of cool.
That's pretty wild. Where I remember I did this data analytics boot camp where you're learning coding.
Yes.
And during it, I thought it would be neat to develop something that could code for you, right? And that's essentially what it is, right?
It's giving meta coding. That is, it's telling them what coding is and what kind of algorithms to develop in order to solve certain problems. Now, can you generalize that process? And John Carmack said this. It really kind of fascinated me. It relates to Leon Letterman, who argued this, I think, in one of his books. He's a Nobel Prize winner in physics. He says, I imagine a day when all the known laws of physics can be reduced to a slogan on a T-shirt. Carmack said he thinks that the solution to AI, or general AI, may already be out there. It's just that we have not accessed all the information in terms of papers, that paper, this paper. And he thinks maybe, just maybe, there will be a simpler algorithm, like a meta learning, a meta algorithm. And that's why he's into it. That's why he got he still does Meta or Oculus Quest, but that's why he got into artificial general intelligence. He thought maybe I could come up with an algorithm to solve the problem, or maybe I can contribute to it.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
That's why I'm a big fan of VR. I'm convinced that VR will solve many of our problems for one reason. You won't have to go use gasoline. You won't have to go fly to Paris. You'll be able to do it virtually and save tremendous amounts of toxic poison.
Yeah. So would you so let's say somebody's on a budget. Would you recommend getting like a used headset?
The Oculus Quest 2 sold for $299 before they raised the price last month for $100, which is extraordinarily cheap when you realize that they're probably losing their shirt on it. I'm sure Oculus wasn't making much money on it. It surprised everybody. But let me tell you what it can do that people don't realize. If I want to buy, if I move over here, I can see it, but a flat screen TV, let's say it's 65 inches, and it costs me, let's say I go to Walmart or Costco, it costs me $600-700. Well, guess what? With an Oculus Quest 2, I can have a movie screen that's 35 or 40 feet big, no longer, called big screen. And I could have different environments. I could have a drive-in movie theater. I could have a science fiction cinema. So what I'm suggesting is that it's extraordinarily cheap because it can allow you to do many, many things you cannot do outside of VR. Like I can make music in VR. I can make artwork in VR. I can make a home in VR. I can play sports in VR. I can play ping pong. I can play, as I mentioned to you, about mini golf. I'll never play miniature golf again, ever. So it sounds expensive, but it really is cheap if you get my drift. Now, what's going to happen is Cambria or Oculus Pro is coming out next month. That, of course, is the next iteration. It's just going to get better and better and better. And it's going to get expensive. But I think eventually it's going to get really cheap. Just like TV. Have you noticed how cheap TVs have gotten? I mean, if you go back to when I was a kid, 1965, it cost almost $500 to get a color TV set up to about 23 inches. You could get, I mean, that means I could buy a 40-inch TV for like today, if I went back in time, for like $25. It's amazing.
Yeah. So would you would get the Oculus Pro for $1,000?
I'm going to, because I'm one of those weird kids, and my kids will be hammering me for it. Let me try it out first for you. And
there you go.
You know what I mean? Like, to see if that's worth it. I personally think the Oculus Quest 2 is good enough. And you could definitely buy a used one for $200, probably, sure. And have you ever done VR? Have you ever done it? Like, have you ever tried it?
Like, where there's like an exhibit somewhere, right? And you put it on.
Right. You need to spend, a good point. You need to spend a long time. Because a lot of times people just try one thing, or Horizon World, which is not very good, and they go, VR. I think there's two problems. Let me tell you what I think are two problems. One is it has to get more comfortable. It just has to be more comfortable. It's a little bulky. The second thing is you and I have what we call our FOV, our field of view, is about 220. The Oculus is about 110. It also has, Apple's coming out with 8K on each eye. Right now it's about 2K on the Oculus Quest. We needed to get it to about 20K. You get it to 20K, you get your field of view to 220, you won't be able to tell the difference between this or this. Now, it's already happened to me. I was telling my wife today when we were surfing, I was looking at the sky. I said, you know what? In VR, the sky looks better.
Yeah.
That's weird. Now, how this relates to Shabad Yoga, let's see if I can loop this all back.
Yeah.
Shabad Yoga's argument is basically this is a simulation. And how do you get out of the simulation? Well, guess what? From the beginnings of humankind, from the beginnings of time, you've been given the secret. And the secret is doubt the present state. If you doubt the present state by Shabad, or the sound current, you get access to new states. Now, the secret is don't get waylaid by any particular state. Go to its very end. And what happens at the very end? Shiv Dayal Singh, or Swamiji, the founder of Radha Swami, says, wonder, 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 Wonder has the summa form, which means he doesn't know. It's indescribable. As Fakir Chan told me, he says the drop melts into the ocean, whatever that means.
Yeah, that sounds profound. Yeah.
And I will be sending my new cult booklet for $29.99. As Elliot is the new Guru, Dorothy.
Yeah. Well, thank you. As we were talking previously, that I'm thinking of maybe being the avatar of Neptune, maybe, right?
That's right.
But we'll have to.
You gave me what I mentioned before. I don't know if we've said this when it was live, but every time I talk to you, the day that morning or that afternoon, I get great surf. And today was great surf, and that's the reason I'm always sunburned whenever I talk. So it's because of your powers.
Yep.
Is you direct communication with Neptune, or are you the incarnation of Neptune?
Very true. So now I have my cult endorsement, so I'm set, right?
Oh, good.
Yep. All right, and maybe we'll start summing up here. But I mean, that was already a good spot, with the whole at the apex.
I should mention, since I got you, I could just say to people, because we talk about Shabad Yoga.
Yep.
And by the way, these are all free. You just go to neuralsurfer.com. You could download us, and nobody's getting any money on these things. But there's a book called The Compass of Truth. It's by Daro Shikoh, who was one of the sons of Shah Jahan, the eldest son. And he was interested in Sufi mysticism. Well, he talks about the sound group, which is really interesting. And then I wrote a book many years ago on the history of Radha Swami. So it's a history of it. We already mentioned it's not like an advertisement here, and literature. And you got the Sound Current, which came out from Cambridge. It's recent. Dialbog wrote a long book, if anybody's interested in academic studies, called Spiritual Consciousness. This is Fakir Chan's Gallows. Then we talk about succession conspiracies. I wrote a whole thing on succession conspiracies, how that works. There's a wonderful Fakir Chan called I love this title, To Evaporate in the Universe. Like just melt it out. Jurgens Mind, who was my mentor, he was a professor at UC Berkeley, then the University of Hawaii, he was the dean. He was the guy who went on a research trip back in the 870s to track down obscure yogi gurus and all that. Mm-hmm. He wrote a book from Princeton University Press, which is the best academic book, called Radhaswami Reality. Then, if you're interested in VR, we have a textbook called Virtual Philosophy, because it has 12 different applications that you can do on VR. And this is Fakir Chand, and this is, don't worry, it goes on forever. And
yeah, good deal. And so, all your books are free on your website.
We have 500. Our Mount Sac Philosophy Group was founded many years ago with the dean, Steve Runenbaum. Great guy. He asked me, I got interviewed I was going to be interviewed by Stanford University, maybe have a lectureship. And he goes, why do you want to go to Mount San Antonio College? It's a community college in California. It's a big one. It's like 45,000 students. The real truth of it, Elliot, is because I like to surf. And I don't like Northern California. It's too cold. But I then said, look, if I'm going to teach here, can we do something different? Like, can we start a publishing company and make certain our books are free because nobody has any money? And so he was all on board. And so we created the MSAC Philosophy Group. We've now published 530 books. Some of them are reprints from before 1925 because they're copyright free. A lot of them are original. And I made certain that we created a massive database so anybody could download the PDFs for free. Then what we did is I got into audiobooks. These cost, you have to go on Audible, but they're pretty cheap, where we have 270 audiobooks that people can, because nobody has time to read a book anymore, as we know, right? You're in the car, you got to listen to something. And then we created some original films. And then the last thing, which I wish I could get back into, do you have an iPad, or do you know anybody has an iPad?
I mean, a tablet. I don't have an iPad.
Right. Okay. Well, Apple came up with this thing called iBooks, which are called interactive books. So you open it up, and you've got this picture, and then you could click onto the picture, and the video would play, or you could swipe and have pictures, or take. It was amazing. I got obsessed by it. So we created 25 interactive iBooks, including, I think, one on Shabad Yoga. The problem is, what I notice is that people don't like to read off a digital screen because they have the phone all the time.
Yeah.
So, ironically, ebooks, if I'm not mistaken, have kind of flatlined. Audiobooks is the only market that's really going through the roof. And paperbacks or hardbacks have come back, kind of like vinyl versus.
Yeah.
So that's
now, is it easier like reading in VR?
That's I'm glad you asked me that. Sorry to get excited, but my son today, you see, I'm like, my kids think I'm all crazy. I go in there all like pumped up, but my son today told me about a new app that's coming out later in September called Librarium. I think it's going to be free, where you can go into VR, create a library that's beautiful like Cambridge or Oxford, and then they'll have books you can actually read in VR, and the pages will turn for you in visual ways. Now here's the future, because I've already figured it out. In the future, you will have your own library that you'll create, and each book you'll take out, and you'll have 3 or 4 fundamental options. You'll take it out, you can read it, have big print, small print, whatever way. It could read to you with different voices. The third method is the cool one. You take the book, put your face into it, and you go inside. And therefore, you're part of the story itself. You become a character, just like Harry Potter.
Okay.
And so that will be the game changer. And that is coming pretty soon, probably in the next 2 or 3 years. We'll have that ability to be in the story itself. And
that'd be pretty neat.
That's the future of education. We don't need teachers anymore.
Yeah, there you go. Well, all right. Maybe we'll leave it there.
Perfect. Great talking to you, Elliot. Thanks.
I know. I loved it. Very good. Very interesting. I like how it all comes together.
That's right.
Right. And I think you've convinced me to get a VR headset.
Good. Well, before you do, this is what you do. Before you do, contact me, email me. I'll give you some advice about how to get a good one, maybe for price, get it cheap. And I'll tell you which apps, and I'll tell you, because I have a lot of ways to gift it, because I'm connected to all this stuff. So you know what I mean? So because you need to know what's the right one. Yeah.
For sure.
And then we can meet in VR. You could be an avatar and I could be an avatar, and you could do your podcast. This sounds weird, in VR. And then you could export it as a podcast on YouTube. And you could dress up as an avatar, whatever form you want, like Neptune. I could dress up, right? Oh, yeah.
That is wild. I wonder why people don't do that.
They do. But it's a small.
Oh, very, very niche.
Yeah, it's very niche.
Yep. We'll have to do it.
All right, man.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy. Good talking.
Bye-bye.